Hello, Pete. Welcome again in our third and final session on strategic messaging. So, briefly again, Pete, why are you the right person to talk about strategic messaging?
So my name is Pete. I help companies craft their narrative or their strategic messaging, which is everything you say about yourself as a company. I basically say you don't take a product to market, you take a story to market. So optimize that story and you'll have better results. My background is sales. It's not marketing or messaging or neuroscience. I'm actually a sales guy with an interest in neuroscience and not a doctor of neuroscience. So my methodology and my system of working is based on the one hand, brain science or neuroscience, and on the other hand, on decades of sales experience and commission-based work.
Okay, perfect. And it's the third session that we speak with each other. So the first session, we were talking about creating the better sales story, talking about the principles, why strategic messaging is so important, and the impact. And in the second session, we were talking about how to build up your messaging. How do you start? And now in this session is going to be a more tactical session. We'll talk about building up a multi-layered messaging because you have your 5 intents from the previous session, but then who is the recipient of the message? And you won't say exactly the same thing to everybody. So let us assume you've just done a first session with one of your clients. You have identified the core messaging. How do you move from there to including the 5 intents in defining who will be the people that will receive those messages?
That's a really good question. So when you talk to a company, you're talking to a diffuse group of decision makers. And you'll have your first touch point, which is typically your champion, your ambassador. They're already convinced, right? You're going to make their life easy, really great. The problem is, unless it's a cheap solution that they can autonomously take the decision and just do it, there's going to be stakeholders involved in the sales process. And some of these people you'll never meet, right? You'll probably never meet the users in the sales context. You'll probably never meet the C-level. There's probably procurement and accounting involved, people that you probably won't speak to. So the question then becomes, can you assume that your champion is able to articulate value as well as you are to those secondary audiences? Typically they're not, right? You need to give them some help. And sometimes people talk about sales enablement. I like to talk about champion enablement, because you're basically trying to influence how people articulate value on your behalf in situations where you are not in the room. So you need to understand who the audiences will be that they'll be talking to and how you can optimize your messaging for those audiences. So first thing you look at is, I'm a champion, I'm in middle management, for example, and I want to have a piece of software that's going to increase my productivity by 30%. I'm going to have to talk to my users, right? I need to have a case for my users to show how it's going to make their life better. And a user is all about, quality of life and speed and work and efficiency and how effective they can be, resource allocation, how tired they are at night. So these are things that you use in messaging for users. There's also your management peers. If you are a champion, you're often in middle management, so you're talking to other middle managers. And these are people that are responsible for processes, for efficiency, for ability to execute. So you need to change your messaging to speak to those things. How is this going to make your team perform better, more reliably, and make your business continuity better? And if you're talking to the C-level decision makers who maybe will never even touch the product, you need to make sure that you talk the language that they speak, which is all about KPIs, right? How am I going to measure my function's performance and present that to the board? What are the KPIs that I can show that shows me that I'm working on things? So those are the 3 things that you need to keep in mind. And we call it messaging layering, where you've got one message. And I always stress, try and keep it in one message and try and keep it in one shareable document, like a mini guide or an ebook or something like that. But make sure there's something in there for everybody. You may have heard me talk about Spice Girls marketing before. The cool thing about the Spice Girls was fans liked the music, but they also had a favorite Spice Girl. Same thing with your content for these multi-level or multi-audiences. You need to make sure that they like the whole thing and it makes sense, but you need to speak to their specific interest as well. So when I have a shareable ebook, it's like, what does this mean for you as a user? What does this mean for you as a manager? What does this mean for you as a board? What does it mean for your clients, for your customers, right? So have something of that in there, and they'll retain what they need to retain. So that's messaging layering, and it sounds complex, but it's not, because once you've done the entire messaging framework with the 5 intents, if you remember, it's like fascinate, educate, differentiate, validate, motivate, the 5 things you do to change somebody's mind. If you've got that, and you've got multiple discussion points for each of those 5 intents, it becomes a menu. And it's almost like going from an a la carte menu where you just pick what you want to here's a set menu for X price. Will include the wines, right? So that's the same thing. You're taking a subset of your entire messaging and picking out the bits that are most relevant to your audience and putting that front and center in their messaging there. So it's not something that you have to be working on all the time. It's all about like what's most relevant right now in my messaging. And sometimes you'll come back and go like, we're missing something. This specific client wants something very specific, and it's not in our messaging. You need to decide, okay, is this relevant enough for other clients to put it in their messaging, or are we going to do a custom job for that? What you don't want to do is do a custom job for every project. You don't want to do like battle cards or specific personalized content, because all you're doing is adding more resource burn to marketing and cost of sales.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I wrote it down as a question because it can be a lot of work once you start. You have a huge matrix, and again, that fragmentation of messaging, different people saying different things. And this is something obviously that we should try to avoid. Besides then what the role wants, sometimes it's also different personality. So how would you go about people in the same role, champions that are either very analytical and on the other side that are not number driven at all? How do you build this into your messaging?
Yep. Very good question. So the method I use behind there is called the Rogers adoption curve for innovation. And you know this, right? This is like the innovators and the early adopters and the early majority, late majority, and the laggards, right? Five categories, which map beautifully to 5 intents, by the way. And if you have, for example, if you've got somebody who's an innovator, I always compare them like they were the ones that built the Tesla Roadster 10 years ago, and you couldn't charge it anywhere. It was very fast, but it wasn't very reliable. But they're willing to suffer the inconvenience because it's interesting. It makes their life interesting. And quite often, you don't have to do much with those people. Like if you have an innovator, just show them something that is really neat and cool for them to play with, and that's a sale. Done, right? Yeah. Typically, they're higher up in the organization because they're risk takers. Then you've got the early adopters. The early adopters were the ones that bought the first Tesla Model S's. Still not great, not a lot of charging infrastructure. If it rained, it would leak, like that kind of, there's a lot of stuff still going on with it. But they wanted to be part of that early wave, right? It's not about be interesting, but it's more about having the identity of being an innovator. Those people, all you have to do is show them exactly how it works and how it's like you're the first to do this, and then they'll respond to that. The third category was the early majority. This is the bulk of people that will buy cars because it's easier. And I think I'm one of those right now. I just switched to electric recently because and I was a petrol head. I mean, I drive a 1971 Alfa Romeo, right? So I was like, no, electric, that's not a real car. But now it makes sense with all the charging infrastructure and the range and all kind of stuff. So if it makes sense for you to do that, so you're going from interest and coolness to early adopter identity to functionality, and then the last one, the last but one is the late majority. They don't trust it. You have to give them a lot of guarantees. That's why electric cars have like these huge battery guarantees. oh yeah, our battery's like 8 years, because that's the failure point, right? They don't really want to go. And the last one is the laggards. Like, they will change if there's no other alternative for them. They will change if, they'll buy a cell phone if they stop making Bakelite phones. So those 5 categories, I identify those because they deal with one factor that to me makes a lot of sense in the sales process, which is risk aversion. Yeah. How risk averse are you? If you're not risk averse, I'm going to have an easier time convincing you with just neat, cool information. If you're extremely risk averse, I'm going to really have to convince you, give you warranties, and put a knife to your throat, or you're not going to move. Yeah. And that risk aversion is something that comes back in pretty much every species. There's specific areas in the brain that deal with that. And by the way, something really interesting, there's something called the DRD4 gene, which is the adventurous gene. I don't have it, sadly. I'm risk averse. But these are the adventurers. These are the people that they go out and they move forward and they take risks and they like it. That's about the same percentage of the population as the innovators and the early adopters. Right. So there might be, it's anecdotal evidence. There might be a link there as to who are the risk takers and who aren't. So you can tell a lot about people based on their risk aversion, and how cool they are taking risks. I always say, if you have a product that is a bit risky to go for, specifically in an enterprise environment, like, try and find people that have been hired or promoted within the last, I'm going to say 6 to 18 months. Yeah. Because they're the ones that'll move things. They're the ones that'll take on a risky project, because they know at some point they're going to be evaluated after about a year, and they want to show the impact they had on the business. If you've got somebody who's like a CIO who's been in the same role for 10 years, good luck. That's like the most risk-averse person you can find, because it's all about like safety and data security and data centers and all that kind of stuff. So that's hard. And I always say, if you want to concentrate your marketing effectiveness, filter on people that have been in your key decision-making role between 6 and 18 months, because that's that window where they stick their neck out, take a big risk, and move on before they move on to their next job. And if I look back at all the major deals I've done, like, there was a major deal with KPMG when I was at Apple, or there was like Airbus and Coca-Cola when I was at a startup. These people only trusted us after it became clear that they could have a big impact with that within the first 6 months of them being in the role. Yeah. So long story short, how do you select which part of the messaging to use for which personality? For me, the core one is risk aversion, right? Okay. How risky are you willing to make your life?
Okay, that's great inputs, because on the one hand, we have the risk aversion. We spoke about appointing people or having newly appointed people that are 6 to 18 months in the role. Above there, we have the board, and they decide about how the company will move into based on market conditions, market evolutions. Yep. How do you reach those people with multi-layered messaging? Because ultimately, they will set out potential priorities and you name it. How do you go about this?
Well, harsh truth and bitter pill, you don't. It's very, very difficult to reach C-level in any channel, right? If you try it on LinkedIn, it's like they're hiding under a rock. I know people that have basically deleted their profile because they were getting spammed by SDRs. So the only way to get into C-level is through one of their trusted advisors in the company. So you make sure that they have the information that is most relevant to the board, which is all KPI based. And very often the board will dismiss it, right? Because they've got somebody to deal with that. I was like, that's not my thing. It's like, this is the guy from the 3rd floor. It's like, he'll deal with it. And the investment that is often required, unless you're like, Salesforce, where I think when I was at Showpad, Salesforce was the biggest cost every year, like the Salesforce license for the entire company. Unless you're that kind of company, it's monopoly money. You're not even going to be on the radar unless it's like a make or break decision. So what is a C-level one, especially a CEO? The CEO wants to make the company ready for the future. So if you can show them how you can future-proof the company, if you can show them how it will support them in executing their vision, then you have a chance. But as soon as you start talking, functionality, processes, business, other KPIs, user friendliness, all that kind of stuff. It's like frequencies they don't hear. So make sure that the person who will address the board on your behalf, which could be the champion, could be somebody else in the organization when you map out the sales process, make sure they have a narrative that is optimized to the ability to execute, right? And how your product, your offering will help them realize their vision in a shorter time. There's a number of examples where, going paperless has transformed the way an office works. And this is not something a CEO would be looking at because it's operational. Yeah. But all of a sudden, they see that communication lines change in a company, and the typical breaking points, the little minuscule risk areas are eliminated. And if you concentrate that upward, all of a sudden, your company becomes a lot more nimble, a lot more responsive. It becomes almost like a startup. That's a story they listen to, right? But, oh, yeah, we can do paperless. Nobody's interested. Well, actually, some people are interested, but not the people that you're addressing with your messaging. So for C-level, I would say optimize the message for something that is linked to their core priority today. Like, what are they in these days? In 75% of cases, it's finding people, right? Mm-hmm. It's finding people on the labor market. That's like the main struggle. My ability to execute is undermined by my inability to attract and retain people that are going to do the actual work. So that's a core thing that I use a lot recently.
Yeah. Brilliant insights. And when you talk about talking to the C-level, talking to the board, it's exactly this. At the same time, you said in previous sessions, your main clients are startups and scale-ups. When you talk to a champion with or as a startup, when you talk to a champion of one of your potential clients, you have a challenge there that you have a small sales organization, and it can be risky to start talking to people where you don't have a lot of sector knowledge from. You know the role, but you don't necessarily know the sector. What are things that you have to pay attention to that you still are relevant to demonstrate that champion or potential champion that you have a compelling story to bring that is relevant also for the rest of their peers and their management and their users?
Good point. So in a lot of cases, the company that you're trying to sell into is a multiple of the size that you are, right? So their primary concern is this company going to be here in 5 years, or are they a funded startup with a runway of 18 months that might collapse in the next 24 months if they don't get everything right? So there's that. There's we're back to risk aversion, right? How comfortable are they taking a risk on a company that is smaller than them? And you need to send them some signals that show stability and health. Sector knowledge is a tough one. Because it's really difficult to get sector knowledge on board with an existing team. Usually you hire them, you hire people. I did a project recently with a company that specialized in data applications for the energy retail sector. Right? So specific applications that are built for that sector. And they were hiring people from the sector, people with reputations in that sector, because their salespeople would not have that same kind of gravitas and weight and credibility as there. So that's one way of doing it, hiring the people into your organization. The second is to approach with a relevant peer from a different geographic area. So here's a project we did at XYZ company in the UK, and you, company in Spain, have the exact same profile, like telecom, for example. If we've done something for telecom in the UK or in Germany, chances are we'll be okay doing it for Spain as well. That's an instant credibility, right? So different companies, and these people are always very interested in how things are run with their peers, and not necessarily competition because they're different geographical backgrounds. But that's like, okay, how we did this at this company. That's like a really good trigger for starting the conversation. And the third is make sure you've got some independent experts that basically vouch for you. People that are really good in their field, that are respected in the market, And these are also people that are always looking for the newest, best, most efficient solution, because that enhances their value for their client as well. Like, I found this really cool thing. You need to look at this. And by the way, I can help you implement it. That kind of stuff. So certain consultants in certain industries are really good for that. Those would be the first three to come to mind, but every customer is different. So you'd have to have a custom discussion or a custom use case for all of those things, and look at what drives credibility in this market. How do I get the right to have the discussion with my champion? That's something you have to map out on a per customer, per industry basis, really.
Yeah, 100% agree, and thank you for the insights. Maybe one more thing, because we have been speaking about strategic messaging. Just to make it clear, I have not heard anything about features. So I think it's very important to understand that strategic messaging is not features, and perhaps when you start rolling out the messaging and when you come with your proposals to the founders, there might be a reflex of, hey, we are missing this, and that we start adding operational stuff again, or technical stuff to strategic messaging. How do you tackle this? How do you manage this?
Well, you said the F word. The F word in sales is features, right? There's a number of things that I do. Like, the first thing I do is I always say, listen, features are part of the educate category for me. They're not front and center, but they need to be there, because people will want to see what it looks like, what it does, what the result is of that. And sometimes I did it recently. I said, listen, just for you, dear founder, we're going to have a feature section on the website. We'll hide it, but it'll be on the website, and you can knock yourself out with all the features, right? You could just show off all the beautiful work you've done, but it's not going to be front and center. It's not going to be the home page. It's not going to be the landing page. It's going to be somewhere in the resources section where you can, it's going to be in between like an FAQ and a feature section. So you have to make sure that it's there, because when a potential customer will do their research on you, they tend to go deep. They want to know a lot, right? So you need to give them the high level message. This is why this is important, right? This is how it creates value. This is what your life is going to look like after you worked with us. And then you're going into the depths of how we exactly do that. This feature, this result, feature benefit, typical sales training, right? Feature benefits, tra-la. So make sure it's there, make sure it's available, but don't lead with it. And just the fact that it's there will give people a lot of confidence in your offering as well.
Okay,
so
great.
Features are the bane of our existence. And the problem is, a lot of the people I work with are founders. They're technical background, so they're feature based, right? You can ask them about a feature, and they can tell you like which code was used and why it was built, and which frameworks were behind it, and what user interface components were needed, and all that kind of stuff. So they love that, right? But a customer is not really interested in that. But it is their world, and I think that's part of the challenges for me, is to come in and talk to technical founders and say, okay, let's take a helicopter view, and your technical expertise is now one component of messaging. It is not the messaging, and we'll have it and we'll use it at the right time, but we won't lead with it, because we'll lead with a concept.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you for that clarification. And what if people have more questions? They want to know more about strategic messaging. How can they reach you?
The best way is LinkedIn. So you'll find me, you probably share the link. You'll find my profile there. And the second way is conversation, right? I'd love to have a discussion. This stuff is really exciting to me. So I love having conversations about messaging. And the best way to contact me would be a LinkedIn connection request or a direct message.
Okay, perfect. And thank you again so much for all the information you shared. And
definitely. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.